Hey, good morning, Barb.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good, really good. Welcome back, everybody.
Yeah, so we're starting. This is the first day of the second week of our mystery knit along, and we're
That's
going
right.
to,
How's everybody doing?
yeah, yeah. Hopefully, I mean, some people may have finished the first two patterns. Some people may be just starting now because we're seeing new signups every day.
That's right. And I've been kind of following along, and we've been getting emails too from people who are saying, "Yeah, I'm done," or I'm just starting. I know there's a few people too who are just getting their packages from us, and they're just starting. So welcome everybody, because it's been a fun sort of knit along, and I think you'll have a great time.
Yeah, it sure has. I've been really intrigued by the patterns that you've chosen. And so
Oh,
this week, we've got two new patterns that are a little more complex, could we say, than the
maybe
previous two?
maybe a little bit, but we're going to give you some tips and tricks on how to master them.
Right. Okay. So let's get into that. Let's talk first about pattern number 3.
Okay. I just wanted to show Cynthia to the book that the patterns have come out with, because some people are wondering where they came from. So I'll just put this up on the screen if you can see it. This is the book that it came from. This is the new Knitting Stitch Dictionary Library. And, I'm sure that you guys have books like this in your libraries. I know I have many of them and I love them. But this one just seemed to have a few that were easy. Part of our goal for coming up with this first mystery knit along was to pick patterns that were easy and weren't too difficult. So this is kind of a great stitch pattern book for that reason.
You use the pattern book to find us pattern number 3 and number 4.
Yeah, they all came from this book actually.
Perfect.
First one, pattern number 3, I called Tumbling Blocks. And the reason I named it that was because it reminded me of Kay Facet's pattern. He's done this shape or this sort of look in color work a lot in his pattern books and in lots of projects, blankets and things like that. So I called it that. And it's not color work, it's just stitch pattern, like it's just texture, knit and purl textures that create a shape that looks like a cube or a block that's on its side.
Right. Yeah. So are you going to show us? Can you show us your sample?
Sure. Let's see. My piece is getting quite big actually.
How many? How many? So you're doing the wrap version,
Yep, I'm
and
doing
how,
the wrap version. And so it's 83 stitches wide and it's getting to be quite long. I'm trying to knit ahead. So I'm actually on um, 3, 4. I'm on block number 5, I think. No, I'm on block number 4. So here's number 3. Can you see that?
I can.
So can you see the tumbling, like the blocks, the cubes are kind of on their side? No?
Yes.
Good.
Yes. That looks really good. And now, what I'll do, Barb, is I'm just going to switch views here, and we'll both hold up our section. So mine is the scarf.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. You can really see yours. Did you block yours already?
No, this is just the way it is. But yours has good definition too, so that's
Okay.
kind of nice to know. Once it's been blocked, I think it'll pop out even more. But
Yes.
it's kind of like a bit of an optical illusion, um, almost like
Like
shadow knitting.
shadow
Okay?
knitting.
Depends on
Yeah.
how the light hits it. Okay, so that's tumbling blocks, and that one is a. Oh, let me think. How many rows are in that one? About
Oh,
22.
tumbling blocks has 20 rows. So you're going to repeat rows 1 to 20 several times, right? But I'm just looking to see if there's anything complex in it.
I
I
think
don't think so.
Yeah, I think the what I found was that as I was working it, the one thing I needed to do was remember which row I was on. So I was using a row counter to help me remember. I'm sure other people are using a little piece of paper or maybe even checking them off
Yeah,
as you do them on the pattern.
I'm using chart tape, and I have to tell you, I have been using so much chart tape with this pattern because I like to know where I am and I like to be able to lift it up and keep moving it over and off and down the next row. So I just find it so handy.
Yeah, yeah. So the highlighter tape is another term for that one, and you can find that on our online store if you want to use that. And it is a very slick kind of tool that you can use with all your patterns or cookbooks or yeah.
So this is what it looks like, and we do have it on our online store. Highlighter tape. It's the best stuff ever. I love it.
All right, and then let's talk a little bit about pattern number 4.
Yeah. Um, I was just going to mention in pattern number 3, there's one more little tip.
Okay.
If you are doing the wrap, you'll probably have to do each row several times, and so you can put markers in after each pattern repeat, and that helps too to keep you on track. If you're, it's like knit one, purl one, knit two, knit, one. So it can get a little confusing. So if you have stitch markers in after each pattern repeat, I feel that that's a really good thing to do. And the other thing is, was using some stitch markers that were kind of fat, and I could start to see ladders happening in my work. So I switched those to bulb pins, and those really are much better. They're very thin, and they sit between the stitches on your needle. So if you're having any sort of issues with seeing lines in your work as you're working, just change to a thinner stitch marker.
Those are good points. I just about the stitch markers with the tumbling blocks pattern. Um, I did find that where you have to have the stitch markers changes.
It does. Yeah.
Right.
And you're having to move them over.
Right. So that might you can just be aware of that, right? If so for you might have it might work for 2 or 3 rows, and then you might have to move them over
Yeah.
the next few rows.
And that helps with that ladder too.
Mm-hmm. Right. All right. And so pattern number 4 is called
A big broken weave stitch.
right.
And so this is kind of like a weave stitch or a basket stitch, but it's quite a bit bigger. And this is what mine looks like. Uh, should I show you the right side? That's it.
That's great, Barb. Yeah,
Yeah.
and here I'll just switch here. I'll show you mine.
Okay. Yes. Good. And I have to share with you the math for those little short columns on the end. That threw me for a loop. I had to really scratch my head and figure out how to make that happen so that because you have a little short section. Oh, yours is actually a little wider than mine. Mine on the edge is like just one stitch. You see the edge there?
Oh yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I got it to work so that it looks uniform. My alternative was to make that garter stitch band on the side wider, just to have this extra stitches be absorbed by that garter stitch band. But I didn't like it. It wasn't perfect.
Yeah, I think it's nice to keep the border the same width all the way up, right?
Yeah, sometimes there's not much you can do because sometimes the pattern actually has garter kind of running along the edge. So,
Yeah.
but for most of the pattern, yes, I think it looks best if you have that happening.
Right. And this one I did yesterday. So I did it in one sitting. So the good news is that if you're doing in a scarf, um, you can probably do each section in a day. If you're doing the wrap, you might want to split it up over a few days, right? Because it's a lot more knitting, double the knitting that the scarf is.
Yeah.
And the only time I had any kind of, what do you call it? I had to pause momentarily and reread the pattern to make sure I was doing it right was when it switched. So when the basket weave switches and you're not, you're not knitting one, purling one, knitting one, purling one anymore. You're just purling or knitting. That was a time when I had to pay attention to the pattern and say,
Right.
like,
Yeah. So if anybody's taking notes, the pattern changes on row 1 and row 12. So where Cynthia's talking about that, it is a little different because you're used to kind of just doing what you see, sort of. And then in row 1 and in row 12, you have to change that up. You have to do the next sort of pattern. So your stitches change from going like this to going like this.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and then the other thing too that you have to keep an eye on, which I thought, and I can see now that I didn't do that because you see here, I've got a mistake right here. It should be like 3 rows like this, and here you can see I've made a mistake.
Yeah, you've got 2 rows. But really, Cynthia, in the whole scheme of things, would you notice that? Like,
Should I?
you probably would.
So I can pull it back to here. I could maybe, ladder down and fix those ones and then ladder it back up again, but I might just pull it back to here and do a re-knit or, practice what I preach and leave it. What do you think, Barb?
Yes, that's right. I mean, we could have a whole episode on showing each other our mistakes, couldn't we?
We could. Maybe I'll leave it for now. Well, I don't know. We'll see what happens. But so pay attention in the pattern to whether you're knitting or purling in that particular section because it is written specifically for that.
Yes, and we know that the pattern is correct because both Cynthia and I have test knit it and test wrote it and double checked it and triple checked it. So
yeah, exactly.
The other thing I wanted to mention in this section is that here your pattern repeats are right above one another. So if you're using markers between your pattern repeats, you don't have to move them. They should stay right in the right spot for you.
Oh, good to know because I didn't use markers on this one. So maybe if I do end up pulling it back, I will put them in there so I don't forget.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was listening to a very exciting audiobook while I was knitting this one. So that's my excuse and I'm sticking to it.
Oh, good. That's a great thing. I was watching TV and my husband was snoring beside me on the couch.
Oh dear, poor Mario. All right. Well, this is great, Barb. So everybody have a lot of fun with the next 2 patterns in our in our knit along, and make sure that you post up photographs of your progress online. I'll add the hashtags to the show notes just down below, and make sure you give us some progress pics of your wrap shawls or whatever you're doing with your stitch patterns. We'd love to see that.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to say, Cynthia, too, that we are not running out of epic yarn. We have lots and lots of epic yarn because a lot of people were asking, and they've lifted the constraints that they had in Peru around shipments going out of the country. So we're getting a big shipment. We should have it in a week or 2 with the colors that we are missing right now because we're missing, I think, 3 of them.
Perfect.
So that's coming in. And just want to also say that we just got a shipment of shelter in as well from Brooklyn Tweed. So if anybody wanted to do their wrap out of Brooklyn Tweed shelter, we're now going to be restocked on that for a couple weeks. This sale has been so popular. Everybody's been purchasing it in sweater quantities or wrap quantities.
Right.
So it's here while it lasts.
Perfect. Thanks, Barb.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay, that's good news. So, yeah, have fun, everybody, knitting along. Let us know how you're doing. And like Barb said, if you want to try out some shelter, how many balls would somebody need to do the scarf in shelter?
That's a good question. I'm thinking that I'm not exactly sure, Cynthia. Probably more than they would need if it was done in Epic, for sure, because there's more meterage on our Epic balls.
Right.
I think shelter are around 50 grams, so probably double. So 7, 14.
You know what I'll do is I'll look up the meterage and I'll put it in the show notes. So if you're looking for that information, just look down below and we'll have it there.
That would be great.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
See you, everybody.
All
Hope
right.
you're enjoying this.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Okay, so it's really late at night and I should be in bed, but that mistake in my pattern is just killing me. So I have to pull it back and do it again. And I thought maybe you might be in the same position at some point and you might like a couple of tips on how to do it. So here's me doing it. Okay, so here I am. I'm going to pull back my work to about here, and I thought you might just want to see how I do that. I have a couple of tricks in pulling back yarn. Probably the most important one, is to have a needle on hand that is slightly smaller than the needle I've been using in my project. And so here's what I'm going to do. Take my needle out, release my little stitch markers, put them to the side, and now I'm just going to rip until I'm about one row above the place where my mistake is. This is the part that sometimes is most disheartening, is the ripping part, but it's not too bad. So I'm going to keep going until I'm about here. And as I pull out, I will keep my yarn neat by winding it onto my ball every few rows. Right, so here I am. This is the mistake part of my knitting, and this is the row that I want to take out. And so as I undo it, I'm going to put it back on my knitting needles. So you can probably see here I've already undone a few stitches on the edge, and so I'm just going to sort those stitches out so that as I put them back on the needle, then the stitch lays flat. And it's good to know that there's a right hand side to your stitch and a left hand side, and I want to put my needle into the stitch or the loop so that the right side of the stitch is facing me. So there's the right, there's the left. I put my needle in so that the right leg of my stitch is facing the front of the needle here. Now, as I pull out my stitches, I'm just going to put my needle in. So you see where this loop is that I'm going to pull out? I put my needle into the same place as that loop and give it a pull. Sometimes I talk about following the yarn. So you see how the yarn is going like this in my hand? So I'm going to put my needle in so that it follows the yarn and then pull out that stitch. And so this way I know I'm not going to lose any stitches. I put my needle in, pull the yarn out, needle in, pull the yarn out, and I just carry on all the way across the row. It helps here because coming up here I've got knit and purl stitches, and you see the knit stitches face forward and the purl stitches face back. They sort of split here, and so sometimes you might miss a stitch if you're not paying attention. So by putting your needle in and pulling the loop of yarn out, you make sure that you don't miss any of those stitches. And because I'm putting it back onto a smaller needle, It's actually quite easy to get that needle tip into the stitch as you're pulling out the loop. There, all my stitches are back on my spare needle, and now I will knit them. I will just push them up onto my spare needle, grab my knitting needle, and just knit them back onto the knitting needle. First I have to figure out which row I'm on, but that's just a matter of going back to the pattern and remembering that in this pattern, halfway through it changes. So this is one full pattern repeat here, and this one is, I'm halfway through. This is one pattern repeat, this is two pattern repeats. So I'm beginning the third pattern repeat here. So I just need to figure that out. Now I see that I haven't gone back far enough because I still have this row here and it's not correct. So I'm going to pull back one more. Oops, sorry. I see that I haven't pulled back far enough because this pattern, this row here is still incorrect. So I'm going to pull back one more row. But now that I've got my stitches on my needle, it's a little bit easier to pull back because I can just go from one needle to the next. So here on the side, I'm again going to move back one row by putting the needle in to the stitch right underneath the one that's on the needle here. See the stitch there? I'm going to put my needle into the stitch underneath the one that's on the needle, and as I insert my needle into the stitch on the row below, I pull it off the needle on the row that's still on the needle. So if I slow that down again, my needle goes into the stitch, my right hand needle goes into the stitch on the row below, and I pull the stitch off the needle and undo the yarn at the same time. Okay, let's see if I've gone down far enough this time. Yes, so that looks the same all the way across. So I've got my stitches back on, and I'm at the right row to carry on with my pattern. And so again, I just need to figure out which row I'm on. So with this pattern, one set of horizontal stripes and one set of vertical stripes complete an entire sequence. So this is the beginning of the next pattern repeat and the end of it. And then I'm here just at the slight beginning of the next pattern repeat, and I have the right side facing me. So I'll put my little right side marker back on. I just clip it into the fabric here. All right, and I'll go back to my pattern and just figure out which row I'm on based on what's sitting here on my needles and kind of counting up from the previous rows. But I just wanted to show you how you can undo your knitting and start again, and you know, it's okay. All right, have fun with the MKAL, everybody.